Today I'm talking about taking up acting in your 40s. I'll share my experiences of how I got into acting at such a late age, and I'll give some insights into how I overcame some of the obstacles that came up for me. So thanks for tuning in. In this episode of One Day I Will Tell the Truth, I'm talking about becoming an actor in your 40s. So most people, particularly those not happy with their current situation, think about career changes at different stages in their lives. But in most cases, find it too hard to make a change. So I thought I'd start by sharing how I got into acting and what my circumstances were at the time. So back in 2014, as some of you will know from my previous episode, I managed to quit a lot of bad habits. I stopped drinking, stopped smoking, gambling, stopped drinking coffee, and one of the things that helped me get through that challenging time, particularly those early stages, was to become more creative. And this took the form of writing initially, and at that stage I'd done a little bit. I'd done a couple of short screenwriting courses here and there, and I found myself writing a blog, and I was also working on a screenplay. So I guess by the end of 2014 into 2015, I'd also started writing a book, which I'm still working on, and it's coming along all right. So yeah. So during this time, I was dealing with a lot of pressures from my business. I'd been in a legal dispute with my service station landlord for the previous couple of years. At the time, I was running petrol stations, and it was coming to a head. So up until early 2015, I guess, I could say I was in a reasonably good place. Not a great place mentally, but working through things. And I'd resisted the temptation to drink and gamble. I was about 7-8 months in, and I was being creative. I was writing, and I was getting along well. And then out of nowhere, it just hit. I found that I couldn't write anymore. And until you have that experience, it's hard to describe. But yeah, writer's block. One day you're writing, and the next day it's like a dam's being put up. So yeah, it was quite surprising, because at the time I felt like things were moving along really well, but obviously maybe they weren't. So I had a chat with my therapist about it, and she suggested that I do something else creative, anything, and that it would come back, my writing, that is. So I got online, and initially I started looking for other writing courses. I thought, that would be a good way to kickstart me back into gear if I was forced to write in a class environment, and that was when I stumbled across acting classes. So I started looking at different schools online, and I started to consider the pros and cons of doing classes. And then I started to have these little flashbacks of the different times in my life when friends or a former partner had suggested that I take up acting, and I'd completely forgotten about these instances. So I found myself falling down the online acting school rabbit hole. Yeah, there's quite a few out there. But yeah, and what I did was I emailed a bunch of schools, at least half a dozen, and also made a couple of calls, waited to hear back, and basically just said, look, I'm a novice, absolutely no acting experience. I'm in my 40s. Is this even a thing for someone in my position? And just asked what was involved, what kind of programs they had. I just thought I'd go with the flow. And a couple of schools got back really quickly, and some of the others I didn't hear back from for a few days or even a week or two, and some didn't get back at all. And by that time, I'd pretty much already made a decision, which, with the value of hindsight, I probably should have sat down with a few of the other schools just to see what their take was. But as I said, I think it was the next day or 2 days later, I found myself in Sydney having an interview with a teacher from a school, and the teacher was also a senior student, and also worked in this capacity interviewing new students, basically selling the classes. And funnily enough, I find myself performing that same role, conducting interviews 3 years down the track with new students. And I'll chat a little bit more about that later. But I ended up enrolling, and I guess the vibe suited me, and they had a schedule that worked for me, so that was good. I was still running the service station at this point, still embroiled in legal dramas with my landlord, and again I'll be doing probably a series of episodes just on my experiences in business and what I went through, particularly with that situation. But I started a couple of weeks later. It was the beginning of a new block or term of classes, and I was doing 3 classes a week, 2 technique classes and a screen acting class. So I kind of dove right into it, really. There was also an expectation to rehearse at least a couple of times a week, and to be honest, I struggled with that. I struggled to juggle everything, as well as all the legal stuff that was happening, and just with the content of the classes, just getting my head around this new environment, and it was a completely new experience. It wasn't what I'd kind of expected. I didn't know what to expect, but I guess I really hadn't put enough thought into it. So I guess one thing is, and this is pretty common knowledge, that one of the greatest fears that most people have is to speak in front of other people, to do public speaking. And not that acting is public speaking, but it's basically performing and speaking, because that's part of the performance, in front of a group of strangers and lots of it. So, so whether you're filming a scene for a show or for a commercial or whatever it might be, it's in front of a group of people who, for the most part, you probably won't know. Over time, you'll get to know people, of course, but, and if you're acting in a theatre space, well, then there's an audience. Well, at least you hope so. So for me, a big hurdle was getting through that initial period of self-consciousness, where you're constantly aware of people watching you, and it can be a scary place. At first it is anyway. It definitely was for me, and I think for most adults in their middle age, taking up acting for the first time, it can be pretty daunting. And unless you're in a group surrounded by people that you feel comfortable with, you're probably going to struggle. And that's why I suggest, if you're going to take up acting, that you're certain that you feel good about where you're going. And I know that's just common sense, and people will do that subconsciously, if they feel right about a particular school or place. But I think there can be instances where people get swept up in the idea of becoming an actor, and they might be in a similar situation to myself, where they've been told by their peers that they should become an actor, and that they're really funny, and all the rest of it. And like I said, amongst the group that you're comfortable with, your peers and your friends and family, that's great. But once you start to get in front of strangers, it's a whole different ballgame. Yeah, another thing that comes up is that some new students might feel that they need to go to a particular school because that's where, someone famous went, or they heard it's a good school, and they might find that once they're in there, it's not all it's cracked up to be, at least not for them. And that could just be simply because of the class environment, the people that they've been placed with, the teachers. So yeah, it was really difficult for me. I found that at various stages I would get really anxious. I would also notice this amongst some of the other students, even some of the younger students. There's this nervousness, and it can start to, it can become anxiety. Yeah, I was oldest in my class. There were a couple of other classes where there were a couple of older students as well, and look, over time that fluctuated. People came and went, but over the 3.5, 4 years that I trained, I was one of the older students for the most part. And so yeah, I think there was a bit of a crossover as far as that initial experience for older actors, as well as the younger ones coming in, those in their early 20s, who made up the biggest group of new students. And then there were those in their 30s and fewer in their mid to late 30s, and then obviously into my group in their 40s. So for most new students, it was the whole thing of having to get up in front of class, and for some of us, it was the first time doing that in front of a group. And it was mostly improvisational exercises initially, and like I said earlier, it was pretty daunting. Other times it was exciting, and you'd get excited about going to class, and if you'd had a good day, you'd be pumped to get there. And other times it was the complete opposite. There were times when I'd drive to Sydney. I'm about an hour and a bit away from there, from where the classes were. And other times I'd drive halfway and get the train the other half. And there were times where I would get off the train in Sydney and I would literally go from one platform to the next and get on the next train back home because I was just too anxious, too nervous, and it just wasn't happening for me that particular day. And that happened 2 or 3, maybe 4 times in the first 6 to 9 months. And there were other times when I'd be in class and I'd wait to be the last student to go up because I was just terrified. There were times where I thought I would have an anxiety attack or something in the middle of the class, but thankfully that didn't happen, but it was tough. And doing scene work was also difficult. Learning lines early on, I really struggled with that. I'd get headaches, and I thought maybe I wasn't eating right, or wasn't getting enough sleep or rest or something like that. But it was actually just a bit of brain strain going on, I think, trying to learn lines. And there were times when I just thought I wouldn't get them. And in the end, I actually became concerned, thinking that I might have early onset dementia or something. I don't know. It's the thing was, it was just that I hadn't exercised that muscle and I needed to get it back in shape. That's what it was. It was just a bit of brain strain. And 5 years down the track, I can safely say that my retention rate is definitely much higher than it was when I first started acting. So that's a positive. So that came into it. As far as anxiety goes, going to class and dreading whether I would remember my lines or not. But it wasn't all being nervous and anxious. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stuck with it. There were instances where I could see, what this was all about, and that really excited me. I'd have moments in some classes where I'd have a good exercise, and I thought, okay, here we go. This is something. This whole idea of inhabiting a character and being able to live in that situation for a period of time. But from a really deep and truthful place, it was just such a great experience. And it was like a drug, and I was hooked. One of the teachers used to talk about acting and talk about it in a way that they'd say it was like a drug, and once you got a taste for it, you'll be hooked. And I used to think to myself, yeah, okay, whatever. And then I got a taste and I got hooked. So, yeah. In the early stages, I didn't really have any intentions of doing acting seriously. In the first 6 to 9 months, I thought, well, this is all right. And the other thing was, and this is probably the most important thing, I guess, I started writing again. And it was great. Something shifted inside of me, and I don't know, something just allowed me to get back into writing, and I started working on it, and I didn't actually go back to the book. I actually started writing a play. So I guess it's important to realize that if if you haven't done this sort of thing before, it's going to be confronting, and it's not necessarily going to be for everyone, because most of us don't want to be out of our comfort zones. Some people thrive on that, but others just don't. I guess a good indicator is if you're the type of person that is very playful and has that childlike streak in them, you'll definitely be better off, because that's what acting kind of is. It's playing. It's living in the imaginary world, and I guess anyone who's had kids, or anyone who has watched kids closely, knows how they can create a situation. They can, stand on a couch and imagine that they're standing on a cliff or over a pit of fire, and be scared not to fall off the cliff or fall into the pit of fire. And they'll imagine it, and they'll have that sense of realism in that moment. And if you watch a child play like that, you just know what I'm talking about. And that's what actors have to get to. They have to get to that place where we were as children, before all this other stuff was stacked on top of us. And I guess the same goes for younger adults. There are those that are just more playful and maybe a little bit more outgoing and have that natural kind of flair to them. Quite often that's interpreted as talent. But yeah, there are those younger adults that are a bit more introverted and take a bit of time to come out of their shell. When they do, it's the same situation as it is for older adults. You've just got to find that playful space. So yeah, getting back to why I got into acting was to get my creative streak back, and that happened. I got it back. I started writing again. So, got my writing mojo back about 6 to 9 months in. And another thing that really helped this was the fact that I had to do a lot more reading. Now, whether it be scenes, or scripts, basically all actors need to be readers. If you're not a reader, you're going to struggle. So I suggest that you start reading even if you just start reading books, because that's important. Reading plays is just, intrinsic to becoming an actor. Reading screenplays, it's going to help you out of sight. And I learned the hard way. So by the end of my first year, going into my second and third years, I was reading dozens of plays a year, numerous screenplays, reading books. In the 2 years, 2015, 16 and into 2017, I read more books, plays, screenplays than I had in the rest of my life combined. The other thing I started to do was to go to the theatre and pretty much fell in love with that. Up until about 2015, I'd probably been to the theatre 3 or 4 times. And by the end of 2018, it was closer to 50, 60 times. So at one stage, I was going to the theatre every 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes more often. And I just found I tried to go as often as possible, and that really helped my acting. Unfortunately, with COVID, it's pretty difficult these days, but that's sure to improved. So as I mentioned earlier, I ended up in the role of interviewing students at the school that I initially attended as a student, and I encountered new students from all walks of life. It was quite an unbelievable experience, and for the period that I did it, which was about 12 months, I met doctors, I met lawyers, I met stockbrokers, I met an optometrist, school leavers, teens still at school, tradespeople, concrete truck driver who's still studying and doing quite well. Just people from all walks of life with a passion for acting in most cases. Some were tiptoeing into it, not really sure, but there was something inside of them that was driving them to change. The professionals, some were just in a situation where they had just finished university. Maybe they'd done their first year of work. I had a number of lawyers in that situation, and they just didn't like what they were doing. In a lot of cases, they'd gotten into careers to satisfy some notion, or perhaps under pressure from family or just from society in general. I found that I got a deep sense that so many people had been pushed into doing something, and it felt like this was the first time they were making a decision for themselves and not based on what someone else expected of them. And it was really great to help people to get on that path. So I guess one of the things you need to do is to find your tribe. Find a group of people that you resonate with, teachers that you're comfortable with, a space that feels good, that has a good energetic vibe to it. You're going to get nervous, you're going to be confronted, and you don't want to be around people that just compound that. You want to surround yourself with people that are calm and nurturing. And the other thing is to have realistic expectations. If you're in your 40s, as I was, it may be wise to take the view of treating it like starting a new trade, like any other trade. whether you're an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter. I was an electrician many moons ago, and I did 4 years of training as part of my as part of getting my qualifications. And after 4 years, I can tell you I wasn't very good. You wouldn't want me wiring your house, that's for sure. But I've applied a similar sort of mindset to my acting, and that is that it takes a good 4 or 5 years to get to a certain level, and that you're always growing. You always need to be learning, and in order to achieve a certain level of mastery, if you want to use a fancy word, you just got to keep working at it. Obviously, it's different for everyone, but for me, I feel like a good 5 to 10 years of grind and constantly testing yourself and working on your craft, and things will pan out eventually. So that gives me another 4 or 5 years to keep going. Get used to the rejection. There's going to be loads of it. And research. I did mention this earlier about researching actors that perhaps became popular or famous at an older age. There are a few that get thrown around quite often, but when you really dig deep into their background, most of them have been doing acting or have been creative in some way, shape, or form for many, many, many years. One good example is Morgan Freeman, who for a long time was put up there as having been someone who was only discovered in their 40s. But the reality is he did children's television for years. And, what better place to learn how to be an actor? Playing with kids. You can hear it in his voice. It's like he's the old grandfather talking to children, when he does voiceover stuff. It's fantastic. It's so there are examples out there, but the truth of it is, in my opinion, most of them have been at it for a long time, and some don't ever get to be famous in the way that we see fame. But I feel they become famous in another sense, where they mastered their craft. They're probably surrounded by a beautiful bunch of people that appreciate the work they do. They could be working in local theatre or doing short films or independent features, or a whole range of other things. Fame isn't the be-all and end-all. But obviously in the world that we live in, we all need to make a living. So, yeah, be prepared for the setbacks. Rejection's part of the game. The other thing is do other creative things. If you're going to act, maybe write a bit as well. For many, it kind of comes naturally. Perhaps play a musical instrument. As I said, in most instances, a lot of people already doing that. Shop around. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. Check out other schools, all the rest of it. Get that right vibe happening. So yeah, I think I'll finish it up about there. Thanks for listening in. I think I've just about covered everything that I wanted to cover today. I feel that it's important to share this type of experience, because a lot of people, have thoughts of career changes, and quite often it's into the creative sphere, and it doesn't necessarily have to be acting, of course. It can be anything else. But if you do, in today's day and age, we've got the resources to research and just make sure you have fun doing whatever it is that you choose to do. I wouldn't change a thing. So yeah, I've babbled on for long enough. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to all of you who've listened to previous episodes, or if this is your first time listening in, thank you so much. If you subscribe to YouTube or to any of the other platforms, particularly the podcasting platforms, if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Or if you'd like to give me feedback over social media, I'd greatly appreciate it. You can see all my YouTube videos, and you can listen to all the podcasts on my website. I did a whole bunch of tech stuff recently, and yeah, I can safely say that it's all working really well. TonyBurria.com, nice and easy to remember. TonyBurria.com, and yeah, just thanks for all the support that you've been giving me, that you've given me so far, and I look forward to producing more content for you. If you have any comments, any ideas, anything you'd like to hear about specifically, anything you'd like to hear more of, Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I look forward to catching you again soon. Take care. This episode of One Day I Will Tell the Truth was produced by Tony Berea. Sound design by Robert Ferreira. You can find details of all my podcast episodes, including full transcripts, edited video copies, and more about me at tonyberea.com.